I think that the process began with listening to the community and trying to understand what the needs were on the ground. I'm a white man who's clergy, who didn't grow up east of Troost, and so I tried to come in with cultural humility. I certainly made a ton of mistakes along the way, but 80% or so of our neighbors and clients are African American, and of our 3,500 clients a year at RS now, 99% live below the federal poverty line. And that was not my lived experience growing up. When we were trying to build a team here, and when I was trying to discern where we were going to go, community listening was a big piece of the puzzle. But then in addition to that, I tried to look at the core competencies of our organization and look at the DNA of who we are, how we were founded, literally the people that had founded us, and try to understand what paint was on the canvas so that we could kind of figure out how to move from there.
In a corporate world where all employees have great leaders with no egos that create fun cultures where people can do their best work, the employees and companies thrive while doing great things for the customers, themselves, and each other.
Well, we know that rarely happens. I'm Jeff Palacio. I have been a leader for over 40 years for every t-shirt size company, from small 16 employees to extra large over 1 million. Please join me while I interview outstanding leaders that will share stories of great leadership and not so great. It will help you become a better leader while poking fun about all the crazy shit that happens in corporate America.
Hi, I'm Joe Deshawn, and welcome to the Corporate Couch with Jeff Palacio. Today's episode is brought to you by Exec HQ, a C-suite fractional firm providing elite executives for your business. Today, Jeff is interviewing Father Justin Mathews. Father Justin is a priest in the Orthodox Church, earning his Master in Divinity from St. Vladimir's Orthodox Theological Seminary and being ordained to the priesthood in 2006. He is a Kansas City native with 25 years' experience in developing and executing successful strategies for mission-driven, for-profit, and nonprofit organizations. For the last 10 years, Father Justin has been the Executive Director and CEO of Reconciliation Services, a $4.5 million nonprofit with 30 employees and hundreds of volunteers. Father Justin is also a published author, co-founder of the Social Venture Studio, and the leader of Thelma's Kitchen, a donate what you can box lunch catering company in Kansas City. You can learn more about Father Justin at the website for Reconciliation Services at rs3101.org. Let's listen as Jeff talks to Father Justin.
Father Justin, welcome to the Corporate Couch today.
Hey, it's wonderful to be with you, Jeff. Thank you for the opportunity to join you.
We joked prior to me pressing record, but with my Roman Catholic upbringing, I wasn't sure what to call you because if you were a father at a church in Peekskill, New York, there was like you were one step to God. You didn't want to do anything wrong, so
Yeah, no, you could just call me the chief among sinners. That there's no step up, maybe just a few number of steps down. But no, I'm really glad to be here with you, and it's great to be able to share about kind of my leadership journey and get to know your audience a little bit and to get to spend time with you.
I've had over 100 guests on the podcast, and everybody has squiggly line journeys and all that. But when I looked at yours, based on the bio you sent me, LinkedIn, your website for Reconciliation Services, it's so much to unpack, and I love kind of where you started and where you are now and everything you've done. And I want to talk about social entrepreneurs and what that is to you and so forth. But I know where you were born and raised in Kansas City. Let's start with a fun question. Even people that know you fairly well, Father Justin, what would surprise them about you?
Oh my gosh. So I was born in Prairie Village and grew up here. And I think most people who know me kind of professionally may not know that I'm also an artist And so I have a band called Not Made by Hands, mostly studio stuff. You can check it out, Spotify, Apple, wherever you listen to music. But I am an indie rock musician, and I used to be signed to a record label way back in the day, right after high school and college, sort of in the 90s. But Jeff, I'm kind of a has-been who never was.
I actually listened to one song or preview of a song on Apple Music, as we discussed prior to getting on air. It was like a Chris Daltrey vibe. That's what I was getting out of it. So, and I was a big Chris Daltrey fan, so I liked it.
No, it's good. Well, hopefully some people will check out Not Made by Hands. But I think that would surprise people, a twist and turn in my journey, but something that, I don't use the H word. I don't use the word hobby. Still very much a vocation for me in terms of being an artist. And I love that part of my life and plan to keep doing it.
So was that kind of your dream growing up as a child? Like, I'm going to be indie rock, success?
Yeah, I mean, everybody wanted to be Bono at some point in time, right? And play for you too. So I did that for a while. I was signed to a record label in Nashville in the late 90s, early 2000s, and traveled a bunch and did music before I ended up going back to Belmont University and got a business degree and an audio engineering degree. But it was definitely part of my journey. But, everything that you learn doing art and music really comes into play in my leadership today, sort of the DIY ethos, but also, just promoting and being a champion for the things that you care about and wanting to share that with the world. I really view the work that I do now at Reconciliation Services and Thelma's Kitchen and such as an extension of that artistic vocation.
Was that the draw to go to Southern Methodist University, SMU? Was the music? You won a MasterCard talent contest for songwriting, I saw. It looked like your first year of college. So talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, so I left Kansas City and went down to SMU because actually it was a little less glamorous than that, but I was in love with a band, and I got an internship at their record label. And so I went down there and I got to Dallas and I realized, man, SMU is not the place for me. But I ended up, winning that songwriting contest, and that led to me moving to Nashville. I took some time off of school and, as I said, did music full time, and then eventually went back to Belmont University and graduated with a business degree from there. And so all of that was an interesting whirlwind in my life. But I did live in Dallas, and then I moved to Nashville, and I was in Nashville for quite a while, got married and stayed in Nashville before bouncing around a little bit more.
So when you graduated from Belmont, you had a business degree and audio engineering. That's like an interesting combination, yeah. But obviously audio engineering is probably from your music background.
Yeah, so the way that Belmont University at that time was running, you didn't do a minor, but you would do an emphasis. So I got a full BBA in business, but instead of taking a minor in finance or something, you could choose something in the music industry. And so I actually chose to emphasize audio engineering. So after I stopped touring so much and doing that, I started recording and producing other people's music, and I've done that and continue to do that off and on. But that's, the business degree was the core of it, which I'm not sure that prepared me very well for a master's in divinity.
Yeah, we're going to talk about that in a second. So it looked like was your first job out of Belmont, the VP of Marketing and Communications at Nashville Rescue Mission?
Yeah, when I graduated Belmont University, I had gotten married, and my wife was a journalist and was actually working for the First Amendment Center with Siegenthaler, and we were really committed to being in Nashville. And I wasn't sure what I was going to do. To be honest with you, I kind of thought this nonprofit thing would be like a stopover, a 6-month, layover on the way to whatever was next. But I actually ended up meeting this guy named Clay Huddleston, who was a Fortune 500 CFO guy out of Memphis who had retired in Nashville, and he took me under wing. And man, he taught me so much about leadership and about business, but he introduced me to this world of nonprofit and business and how they collide. And, we didn't really call it social entrepreneurship back then, but I fell in love with the idea that I could marry my love for entrepreneurship and business, my faith, and then also, trying to do social good, trying to be involved in social action in the world. And in particular, I have a heart for folks who are struggling to survive and succeed, those who are suffering from trauma and poverty. And so, Clay hired me, and gosh, I think I went through 3 CEOs in 3 years. They were in a major transition. So every time a new CEO would come in, I had the privilege of getting promoted and more training. And so at a very young age, I ended up being vice president there. And we had, I think it was a $5 or $6 million 1,000-bed homeless shelter at the time. And now it's significantly bigger than that. But it was trial by fire, but I was taken under wing by Clay and just learned so much from that man. And I'm so grateful for his influence in my life, even to this day.
Wow, that's great. So was he on the board of Nashville Rescue Mission then? How'd you
Oh,
meet
he
him?
was incredible. I mean, gosh, anybody in your audience should do this. Like, he retired and he said, man, I don't really need to work anymore. What am I going to do? I don't want to play golf the rest of my life. And so he just went to work as the CFO of the Nashville Rescue Mission for free.
Oh,
He
wow.
just, I mean, and that man worked full time. But, I think they paid him $1 a year or something like that. He took all of his wisdom, all of his experience, all of his passion, his faith, and he gave it. He applied it. It was his tithe. It was his offering. And, it was, I'm grateful to him for all he's given me.
So it looked, and you talked about your faith, but now you're VP of Marketing and Communications at Nashville Rescue Mission, and looks like you pivot right from there to go to St. Vladimir's Orthodox Theological Seminary. So what was your thought process there? And it's pretty big pivot, from
Yeah.
okay.
Yeah, there were a couple of stops along the way there. I became an executive director of a small organization, and I did some consulting and some other things, both in the nonprofit world and some entrepreneurial endeavors. But what I realized, Jeff, was even in the nonprofit world, climbing a ladder wasn't really meant for me. Climbing a ladder in the nonprofit world is the same as the for-profit world. You just don't get paid as well. And so I really wanted something more. And I got inspired by a guy named Father Gregory Boyles, who probably a lot of your listeners have heard of, but he wrote a great book called Tattoos on the Heart. And he was this social entrepreneur priest in LA who worked with street gangs. And instead of starting, just homeless shelter type stuff, he started something called Homeboy Industries and started doing a lot of social entrepreneurship. They had a t-shirt company, a bakery, a lot of job training. And so I was really inspired by him. But although I didn't grow up that way, I had become an Orthodox Christian in my life at that point in college. And I wanted to sort of follow that path. So what made sense to me at 27 years old was, hey, I think I'm going to go to seminary and get trained. To be honest, I never thought I would be a priest. I just thought I would be a well-trained layman, and I love theology. I love poetry, philosophy, theology. But as life would have it, I ended up becoming ordained as a priest, and my wife and I began this next phase of the journey.
I love that, and we talked about it earlier. Like I grew up in Peekskill, New York. Your seminary was in Yonkers, I believe. So it was too bad we weren't there at the same time.
Yeah. St. Vladimir's Seminary, right there in Yonkers.
Yeah, I love that. So so after you graduate seminary school in '07, like what was your plan at that point?
I went to Oak Ridge, Tennessee, and I was the second pastor at a church there, and I did a lot of campus work as well. But I quickly realized after a couple of years of being in parish ministry that it just felt small. It was very important, but I had a lot of drive to try to do other things. And so not long after I got there, I received an invitation from a philanthropist to fly back to Kansas City and to join a group of about 40 people who were trying to discern at that time how to establish a domestic Orthodox Christian outreach to really help the poor, kind of like Catholic Charities. The Orthodox Christian Church at the time didn't have a significant domestic work like that. There was a lot of international work. So by the end of that weekend, I had been asked by the founders if I would be willing to establish that and to become the executive director of that effort. And that became known as Focus North America. And so I labored away at that. We started here in Kansas City. And in fact, I was really good friends with the founder of Reconciliation Services, where I am now. He and his wife, and their life and ministry and the work of RS really was the pattern, the DNA that I latched onto. And I started to ask myself, how do we scale and multiply this work here? Because it's so wonderful and different than what I had experienced before. And so I began to replicate that into what were called focus centers. So we started from zero. We had some seed capital from the founders, and then from there moved on, and we scaled it up to 7 different cities, and it's continued on after I left in 2012.
Yeah, I went on LinkedIn. I saw it had I don't know how many employees, but it was maybe over 100 or close to 100. So yeah, that's very interesting. But it's interesting because you're getting these jobs. I mean, you're where were you getting inspired in terms of leadership? And you talked about Clay Huddleston, but were there other people, mentors, books that helped you on this leadership journey? Because you were taking a lot of responsibility at a very young age, relatively.
Yeah, I was in my 30s, young 30s, when I started Focus with the founders. There have been people along the way, and I'll tell you one of the key people for me, who's also a dear friend. Some of your audience might know Michael Hyatt. Michael Hyatt and I knew each other from Church World in Nashville, and he's a New York Times best-selling author. He's written scores of books, and he's got kind of an award-winning planner system called the Full Focus Planner, which I use religiously and have for a long time. But Michael started that whole effort with a blog. And since I knew him as the chairman and CEO of Thomas Nelson Publishers in Nashville, I had kind of clued into his blog, and he was writing awesome leadership content back then. And so, anything that he was reading, I started to read. And eventually Michael was my executive coach for a little while, and just has been a wonderful influence in my life. But I love business content. So, when Traction came out, I read, a lot about the entrepreneurial operating system. And there's another guy named Alex Sharfin that I listened to his podcast for a long time. And so, what I ended up doing was cobbling together all these different inspirations and created my own EOS, as it were, entrepreneurial operating system, but in the nonprofit world. And really the shift came when I started to see myself not as a nonprofit leader as much as a social entrepreneur. Because I never really felt like I fit in the business world, in the church world, or in the nonprofit world. I was always somebody trying to blend all of those things. And until I really discovered social entrepreneurship, I didn't know that was possible. For those inspirational people kind of helped me get to that place.
And then what was obviously you established a relationship with the founder of Reconciliation Services. Yeah, I went to the website and I saw the story. It was an Overland Park insurance sales person that was, I think starting with his wife, who's named Thelma. You had that relationship, but at what point did they pluck you out of where you were at and say, hey, we need you to be the executive director, CEO, to lead us to the next stage of our growth?
Yeah, so when I had been executive director of Focus North America, again, kind of looking to Father Alexei and his wife, Mother Thelma, for inspiration, I actually worked out of this building at 31st and Troost, and I had become sort of the volunteer assistant pastor and priest at a church that he ran at the time out of this building. And then my wife and I were volunteers. My 3 boys are 22, 20, and 17 now, but at the time they were toddlers. They were little guys. And we used to come down here for the free Friday night meal and volunteer starting in about 2009. And I didn't become CEO until 2013. And, the way that unfolded was, unfortunately, Father Alexi's wife, Matushka Thelma, Mother Thelma, passed away in March of 2013. And Father went on a sabbatical for a while. I filled in for him. Eventually, he became a monk, and devoted himself to prayer and started a monastery. And so in that time frame, while that transition was happening, I had left Focus North America. My kids were getting older, and gosh, I was traveling like 80% of the month. It was just really time for me to step down. And so at that point, Father called me and said, what would you think about, becoming the CEO of Reconciliation Services? And that was a big decision, because we felt like we couldn't be commuters to our community. We'd been working at 31st and Troost, but at the time we were living in Overland Park. And we felt like at that time that we needed to really be committed to the work. And that meant that we needed to move east of Troost. And so, I'll never forget the day. It was near Christmas, and my wife, when we were praying and thinking about this, she said, what are we building? What is it that we're trying to do with our lives? We need to do something substantive. And she said, we need to learn to live faithfully and not fearfully. And I'll never forget her saying those two things. And we made the decision to move, to 36th and Forest, east of Troost, and to raise our kids there. And, we were there for about a decade. And that's when I became in charge of Reconciliation Services. Father Alexi ended up establishing a monastery north of Cameron. I'm still very close to him. He's a deep friend and mentor to me.
Yeah. So now, you were the executive director at Focus North America, but you're in this different space now and in charge of something. And you have a great success story there. You started there with $650,000 in revenue and 4 employees, and you grew it to kind of 4.5 million plus, and 30 full-time employees, 100 plus volunteers. So what was your process, and what was going on in your mind at that time?
I think that the process began with listening to the community and trying to understand what the needs were on the ground. Admittedly, I didn't grow up east of Troost, and I'm a white man who's clergy, who didn't grow up east of Troost. And so I tried to come in with cultural humility and to listen. I certainly made a ton of mistakes along the way, but 80% or so of our neighbors and clients are African American, and of our 3,500 clients a year at RS now, 99% live below the federal poverty line. And that was not my lived experience growing up at all. And so when we were trying to build a team here, and when I was trying to discern where we were going to go, community listening was a big piece of the puzzle. But then in addition to that, I tried to look at the core competencies of our organization and look at the DNA of who we are, how we were founded, literally the people that had founded us, and try to understand what paint was on the canvas so that we could kind of figure out how to move from there. Not long after that, I began to experiment with these ideas around social entrepreneurship. First, it was an internet cafe that we did in partnership with a group called Connecting for Good, and then now called PCs for People. They were in our building. And then, from there it became the RS Cafe, which was sort of a lean startup model of what is now today Thelma's Kitchen, which we launched in August 2018. Each step of the way, I think my theory of change was evolving, and my personal leadership was maturing and evolving. And it took an incredible team and a lot of listening, but we tried to build an organization that responded uniquely, but decidedly to the unique needs of this community and what they were telling us was needed in order for them to thrive and succeed.
Today's podcast is brought to you by Exec HQ, a C-suite fractional firm providing elite executives for your business. If you're having challenges taking your business to the next level, if you want to augment your leadership team, or prepare your company for increased growth, profitability, and an eventual successful exit, we have seasoned executives from every C-suite position ensuring a perfect fit for your needs and the dynamics of your industry. You will work with senior leaders who like to roll up their sleeves while checking their egos at the door. They can help your business in specific services such as strategic planning, executive leadership coaching, financial management, corporate governance, marketing, sales management, and many other advisory solutions vital to your business success. That's exechq.com. To learn more, go to exechq.com or email Jeff Palacio at jeff.palacio@exechq.com.
Was there any aha moments the first 6 months saying, oh my goodness, I know I was a volunteer here, but I didn't realize this was going on, or I would have to deal with this situation?
Yeah, the first aha moment was when I realized that we weren't going to get the grant that we thought that we were going to get to pay for my salary that year.
Jeez.
So, yeah. So, here I was, like, I got 3 kids. We just moved east of Truce. We're all in, right? And I thought, okay, I got a little bit of runway, and then that didn't happen. And so, I spent a lot of time fundraising just to build the foundation of the organization. We were in the early stages of building what now is a really robust and transparent accounting system. And, we believe, and I believe radically, in sort of a donor bill of rights, that we ought to be accountable to those who are supporting us as well as to the community that we're serving. And so I kind of had to build everything from scratch. We didn't have emails and websites and servers, and it was just all of this stuff. But that's, Jeff, that's the stuff I love. I'm truly more of an entrepreneur in personality than I am maybe an operator. I can do both, but one is life-giving and the other is not as enjoyable. So I love that entrepreneurial journey of taking a vision and then executing and watching it come to life. So we got past that first hurdle that first year and started fundraising and building the foundation of an organization that now today, thank God, is thriving.
Yeah, no, it's amazing. You talk about, servers and data stuff. I mean, I saw you had a brief stint at Quantum eDiscovery. They do data analytics for legal
Yeah.
and kind of acquisition for companies that are or involved in legal cases, I guess. I mean, do you have that in your DNA, kind of the kind of data bend, or?
Well, I'm the son of 2 attorneys. So, I was supposed to study law, but I went a different direction. But for a minute there, when I was in between reconciliation services and focus, I tried on a number of different hats. It was also, kind of in the wake of the financial crisis and the housing crisis. And so one of the things I thought was that I would enjoy kind of being in that legal field. So I became certified in that eDiscovery piece. And what I was really interested in was building the company. I had a friend who had started that company, and I saw an opportunity to do that. Pretty quickly realized that wasn't the direction for me, but it's on the LinkedIn.
And we've been talking about the kind of the racial and economic dividing line in Kansas City being east of Truce. But for even the Kansas City listeners that don't know, and definitely people outside Kansas City, maybe give a little brief history of the racial and economic divide.
Sure. Well, every city in America has that because it was engineered that way. If you look at the 200-year history of Troost Avenue, you can find a Troost Avenue in every major city in the United States. Troost represents symbolically and even still factually, if you kind of look at the census data, this economic and racial dividing line. 200 years ago, Troost was essentially a hunting trail that went down to Caw Point, and the Osage Nation was here, and they were forcibly removed down to Oklahoma. And there were, betrayals and treaties that were broken and a lot of heartache. And as that happened, then you have, skipping forward into the 1830s, you have the establishment of a plantation known as the Porter Plantation that was actually owned by Reverend Porter and his wife. And They had moved from Tennessee with upwards of 40 enslaved people. And he had 360 acres that stretched from basically Hospital Hill over to Paseo, from 31st up north, and I think stopped around 24th Street. And that plantation actually grew from 1830s until the emancipation in 1865. And sadly, there were upwards of 100 enslaved people reportedly at the height of this plantation. And, people forget that Missouri was a southern state. It was a slave state. And so you have this history of racial segregation and sorrow that's really sown into the scarred soil of this very ground that we're on. In 1865, after the emancipation of the slaves, still what became known as Millionaire's Row later, as this land was subdivided and developed, this area still was hyper segregated. And so if you were African American, you were not allowed to live south of 31st Street or west of Troost Avenue. But all around here, this flourished as one of Kansas City's first great suburbs. You had the rail car that came up through here, such that by the 1950s, this was a thriving business district. And some of your listeners may even remember, if they're old enough, that time there were over 144 businesses within a 12-block walking radius of 31st and Troost. And still, it was segregated, though. In fact, the Linwood Businessmen's Association made sure that if you were African American, that you clearly knew that you were not welcome here. The old Majestic Theater across the street used to have segregated showings of its movies, but at the same time, you had greats like Parker and Bird and other great jazz musicians played right here at 31st and Troost. So, this history of racial segregation, though, continues, and all the way up through, Brown v. Board and then the Civil Rights era. And then in about 1968, after the assassination of Dr. King, you have riots in Kansas City, April 9th, and then they're following. And really, Kansas City declared Troost Avenue de facto sort of the racial and economic dividing line at that point. It sort of became what Mayor Sly James used to call the demilitarized zone in Kansas City. And economic disinvestment was a reality. And so the east side of Kansas City hasn't seen economic investment like we have today in generations. Of course, you have the development of 71 Highway, which ripped right through an African American community through eminent domain and really divided the city then physically. So, all of that history, Jeff, contributes to when we talk about Troost Avenue as this racial and economic dividing line. It's not like we just woke up and, the African American community lived on the east and the white community lived on, the south and the west. All of that was engineered through racially restrictive covenants developed by J.C. Nichols, by, the economic policies like redlining and other things that were even reinforced by the federal government at that time with regard to housing and lending. And, this history used to not be known as much. Certainly there's been a lot done on it in the Kansas City Star and other sources in the last decade. But the reality is that the clients that we now serve and the neighbors that we, commune with on a daily basis here, they didn't just wake up in poverty, and our neighborhoods weren't just riddled with crime out of nowhere. Trauma wasn't rampant because it just happened. I mean, it really was successive, intentional division that created the conditions for poverty and trauma that we now have to fix, and that we have to walk with our neighbors and try to see all ships rise together.
Yeah, no, it's so interesting. And, Brandon Calloway, he and I worked together at United Way, Greater Kansas City. He started GIFT, Generating Income for the Future, which helps Black-owned businesses east of Troost. And he started that during the pandemic. Literally when it's... Yeah.
Great organization, absolutely.
Yeah, Brandon. And he brought the awareness to me after I saw him on Randy Powell's Lesson in Leadership podcast. and then I had him as a guest here too. So yeah, I mean, it's amazing that the history and that people don't know, right? And so I'm glad you talked about it and kind of enlightened people both
Well,
in
we need
Kansas.
to know that history. And frankly, I'm a Johnny come lately. I mean, there have been people that have been living and raising families in this community for generations whose names will never be known, who were great pillars in the community. And, it's really, we stand on their shoulders doing the work that we do. So no credit should go to us whatsoever. But people like Father Alexei, our founder, his wife, Thelma, who lived and raised her children in this neighborhood long before I lived here. These are the great heroes that we need to remember. But we are trying to build on the foundation that they've laid and try to figure out how to scale the work so that we can really thrive as a city. And that regional prosperity perspective is one that both, especially business leaders, we need to embrace that. We need to recognize that when one part of the body is suffering, the whole body is in pain. And if we want to be the great city, hosting the World Cup and Super Bowls and all of these things, then we need to pursue strategies that encompass regional prosperity, quality access to healthcare, mental health, and these other things, because that's how we're all going to become the great city that we know Kansas City is and can be.
Yeah, you mentioned the former mayor, Sly James, one of the greatest mayors in Kansas City history, and he recommended a book to me after we had coffee before he came on the Corporate Couch podcast, and it was about kind of the legality of the dividing lines in various cities, and I can't remember the name of the book, but I did read it. You talked about the founder's wife, Thelma, several times. You're about 5 years into your run here at Reconciliation Services, and you launched Thelma's Kitchen. Talk a little bit about that for people that don't know about it.
Sure. So Thelma's Kitchen is a pay-it-forward restaurant where you can share a meal, build community, and pay it forward. And the idea really was, how are we going to accomplish economic community building sort of at the macro level? How are we going to fund and fuel an economic investment on Troost Avenue that is not just gentrifying, but that is also not only development, but sort of a do no harm development? And so we had hungry people and we needed to figure out how to feed them, but feed them with dignity and sustainably. And then really I wanted to pursue an opportunity to have a social enterprise as front door. So, Jeff, one of the things that we heard in our community listening was we feel sometimes over social service. If you think about the neighborhood where you live, it's likely that there isn't a social service agency on every block, right? There's a grocery store, there's a restaurant, there's a place to shop, get your hair done, whatever. But for many in our neighborhood, churches and social service agencies are on every corner. That's one of the pieces of feedback that we got from our community and from our clients. They said, look, we want places to shop, places to be, places where we feel welcome as well, that we can also afford. And so from that, inspiration came to develop what now is known as Thelma's Kitchen. And it's a beautiful concept. It's really kind of almost an image of the kingdom of heaven, right? I mean, everybody is welcome, whether you're a CEO or whether you're homeless, whether you're a client at Reconciliation Services or you work at a business downtown, everybody needs to eat lunch. And so when you come into Thelma's Kitchen, you come in and you order and you pay it forward for somebody else. So you might come in and order what I think is the best lunch in Kansas City. And, it's $15. You get an incredible meal. But when you're there at the register, we're going to say, hey, Jeff, would you mind paying it forward for one or even more people so that they can eat today too? And then when somebody comes in and they're having a hard time affording a $15 meal, they can pay it forward what they can, and people make up the difference. And so in that way, we really are each other's bootstraps. So every tip, every donation, we also have a catering company. So you can go to thelmaskitchen.org and you can cater your next staff meeting. You can cater your next fundraiser. I've even had somebody cater a wedding. And so really that social impact approach really changed the narrative for us. And it threw the doors wide open for volunteers, for community members in need who are hungry or looking for a place to belong. but also for the business community who, they've got a full-time job in a cubicle. They don't work full-time at Reconciliation Services like I have the privilege of doing, but they have a heart and they want to make a difference. And so, you can do that just by eating lunch at Thelma's Kitchen. It's as simple as lunch. That's a great place to begin.
Yeah, and a 5-star review on Yelp. So there you go.
I'm telling you, thelmaskitchen.org. It's the best lunch in Kansas City, hands down.
Outside of fundraising and generating revenue so you can help more people, what would you say your biggest challenge is right now, Father Justin?
There are a number of challenges to an organization our size. I mean, it just kind of depends on which lens you put on. When you talk about the community lens, the greatest challenge is that every day people come in dire need. People are living paycheck to paycheck. They are facing eviction, sometimes through no fault of their own. You've got hardworking moms and dads trying to raise kids, working 2, 3 jobs sometimes. They don't have transportation, so the only jobs they can get are on a bus line. 80% of the quality hourly wage working jobs are 2 to 3 bus rides away from downtown Kansas City. And so, if you can imagine, you've got a kid in daycare who's sick, and you're 3 bus rides away, and you're an hourly wage employee at a factory or at a store or fast food joint, and you don't have PTO. So you got to go pick up your kid from daycare or school, and you're losing income from that day. It's just, Jeff, the pressures compound on people. And I think one of my greatest struggles is to help get people to move from a perceived need to a felt need, where they really understand that 98% of the people that come to us are not just lazy, who don't want to work, addicted. I think if we dig deep enough, each of us in our own families, in our own lives, we know somebody, maybe we're even that person, that's been a paycheck away from something dire. Or maybe we've even lived through an abusive relationship or been really down on our luck and struggled. And somebody came and gave us a way out. Somebody supported us, gave us that opportunity that we needed to move forward. Well, Reconciliation Services tries to be that for over 3,500 people a year through Thelma's Kitchen, through social services, trauma therapy, and then through job training and economic community building work. That's a pretty big struggle. And then, along with that, all the leadership problems and challenges and opportunities that you would have running any business organization that's grown rapidly over the last decade and now has 30 employees, which is still a small business, but really life changes from an HR and leadership perspective once you hit about that level. And
Right.
My friends tell me like 30 to 50 is the next chunk and 50 to 100 is the next
Yeah.
level. And, so I'm facing all those leadership challenges that any of your listeners would, in addition to raising the capital that we need to keep operating and keep growing. And the need doesn't stop.
Yeah, I mean, well, let's talk a little bit about kind of a unique leadership challenge that you had, as well as many CEOs. But for-profit companies had a hard time with COVID when COVID began in March of 2020 and things shut down. But gift giving goes down, fundraising, things like that. So how did you get through the COVID pandemic, and kind of what were your big challenges and how did you overcome them?
Well, COVID was a nightmare for everybody, and especially those of us who were running restaurants. We had Thelma's Kitchen was closed down March 13th, 2020, just like every other restaurant here in the county. And we went from, hundreds of patrons every week to 0. But the difference is that the hunger didn't go away, and people, especially those who were on the streets, who didn't have access to hygiene or news or the things that a lot of us did in the same way, they were afraid. And so we never shut down. Now we pivoted hard. We started feeding people out of the front door, just giving away food that we could no longer cook from a restaurant standpoint. And, partnered with harvesters and others to keep doing that. But it was during that time that we began moving rapidly towards launching a catering company because we knew we needed to keep the brand alive in as much as the social venture, was a business. We need to keep that brand alive. And so catering and paying it forward by ordering catering and box lunch became a big deal for us. But, our work actually like doubled in that time frame. Think about the number of people who were on the verge of homelessness. And, we had eviction moratoriums, but those ended at some point, and people were way back on their rent and their utilities. Unemployment was over the top for a long time. And just the landscape shifted drastically. But Reconciliation Services never closed our doors. We figured out how to operate safely and to keep going, how to keep seeing our neighbors for case management and therapy virtually, but also face to face. And so, like any organization that stayed open, a lot of places closed, but those of us that stayed open, we struggled, but we kept going. And the generosity of this city is unprecedented. It's amazing. And so through the generosity of, United Way, Hall Family Foundation, Kaufman, Sunderland Family, these big foundations really did come together to buttress some of the anchor organizations like Reconciliation Services to make sure that those who were really struggling and didn't have means could survive and stay healthy. So we kept growing, we kept going. And now, we've reopened Thelma's and very excited to be in our new building and getting back to what we used to remember as normal.
It looked like you started or co-founded the Social Venture Studio in the COVID period, 2021. So that still was technically the pandemic. What was your impetus behind that, and your goal, and why do it when you're trying to deal with your own issues and challenges with Reconciliations Services?
Yeah, so I was, privileged to be the co-founder of Social Venture Studio with Kevin McGinnis and Jim Erickson, with the support of Drew Eanes, and the Sunderland Family Foundation gave the initial gift to get us going. And the idea for that was really, I think, spurred on by COVID in my mind, because I began to realize, especially during COVID, that the future of philanthropy is not going to continue to look like it always has, that we needed to find a way to scale and grow community impact, but that it needed to be sustainable and scalable in a way that only traditional philanthropy was not going to allow. And so I believe that social entrepreneurship is the future of philanthropy, and that we had an opportunity in Kansas City, as I've said for a number of years, to become the most social entrepreneurial city in the country. Kaufman talks about being the greatest entrepreneurial city in the country. That's their kind of vision. And I tack on to that I think we have an opportunity, based on our philanthropic history and the great organizations that are here, to become well known as a social entrepreneurial capital. And so what we needed was to work on that ecosystem. There were a number of organizations out there. Some of them knew of themselves as social entrepreneurs. Some of them were not quite sure. Am I a business? Am I a nonprofit? I'm this weird hybrid. Being as that's been my passion for, over 2 decades now, a group of us came together and felt like we needed to have a studio accelerator program that would take all of the resources and the access that entrepreneurs got through Launch KC and other grant programs, and we needed to make those available to those unique and hardworking entrepreneurs who were trying to marry social good with their business, whether they were for-profit or nonprofit. And so that became the Social Venture Studio, and very proud now that we've had 3 classes, 3 cohorts go through 21 companies. We're finishing that 3rd year now, and very proud of the work that Keystone Innovation District has done, who Kevin operates the Venture Studio and does a fantastic job with that.
Yeah, Kevin's great. I got to visit one time during his Wednesday speaker series where he highlights various companies and and groups and went down there. So yeah, and Kevin's been a guest on the podcast also. So yeah, that's fantastic. And it looks like you dabble in you did the social venture studio, which is phenomenal for Kansas City, but you're also a mastermind facilitator for social entrepreneurs. You're a leadership coach. I dabbled into your social leader e-course on Teachable. Talk a little bit about those kind of things and your passion for them.
I think entrepreneurs are people that are always seeking the adventure of creating the next thing, right? And so I probably have 10 ideas a day. 9.5 of them are terrible, but being able to find the right one and then execute on it is everything. So, the social leader, if you go to thesocialleader.org, you can find my e-course on social leadership. And social leadership is all about, when you're in the business world, how do we create a community, a mindset, a leadership model that sees beyond just check writing and boards, but really sees the power of being that engaged social impact leader. And so I teach people in that e-course how to think with a social entrepreneurial mindset, how to become bias aware and trauma informed in their leadership. So I really take kind of the best of everything that I've learned over the last 25 years in the nonprofit world and apply it to a business community context. It's a really unique leadership modality that I encourage people to take. And of course, all of the proceeds that come from that e-course go directly to fund and fuel the work that we do here at Reconciliation Services. So it's a double win. But those programs represent, me trying to expand and scale impact as a leader. I have a desire to have a greater impact personally than just the corner of 31st and Truist. And so from this vantage point, with the privilege and the opportunity that I have here, I keep trying to figure out ways to share those experiences to see that social impact scale and grow.
In terms of who are the people you're looking to help from the kind of that leadership coaching perspective? What does your ideal person look like?
Well, there's kind of two categories. One would be somebody who's an aspiring social entrepreneur, somebody who doesn't understand, where to begin. They've got an idea. They're fascinated by this intersection of market demand and community need, and how we can create that differentiated, scalable social impact through business. I like to work with those folks, both with ideation for their business, but also how to establish the legal structures and governance and accounting and all the mechanics of that. So I do coaching in that area with folks. And then on the other side, I love to work with companies, particularly to come in and drop in on a leadership team and lead a retreat to sort of help open their eyes to how, from their lens, they can incorporate social impact more thoroughly into the fabric of their company. Because we need more than volunteer days and, PTO time to go do community gardens. The business community has the ability, in fact, is uniquely good at moving capital to market to solve for a market demand or a problem, right? That skill set is exactly what we need to apply to address social and community issues in our landscape as well. Now, there are some issues that you're always going to need philanthropy to fill the gap. But there are some issues that if a company begins to earnestly pursue it, I believe that we can have a tremendous impact in the community. If you look at the great men and women that have come before us here in Kansas City, you've got Mr. Kaufman and Mr. Block, and you've got men and women in that generation who established a community known for philanthropy and known for trying to network with one another to move the needle, not just on business, but on social issues that were critical. We need to keep that going. And as that torch has now been passed to us and to our generation, we need to look for new ways to continue to do that same thing in our context.
Yeah, no, that's very interesting. I mean, and you're right. I mean, there's having worked at United Way, one of my, even though it was an 8-month stint. It was during COVID, pre-COVID, and then during COVID. But I got to work on the One Kansas City Day of Giving, where we raised $2 million for local or regional COVID relief efforts with Mark and Greater Kansas City Community Foundation, and we raised $1 million just from e-commerce and all the media outlets, TV and radio, promoting it all day long. And then I think it was the Hall Foundation and I think the Sutherland Foundation matched at $500,000 each, so
Yeah.
it's $2 million day, and
Amazing.
the goal was 10 million for the period, and I think it ended up raising about 19 million. So
Yeah.
it goes to show the the generosity of the people and businesses in Kansas City. So
Absolutely.
I just recently saw former Mayor Sly James and his business partner Joni Wickham talk, and Sly's been a guest here, and Joni and I just met briefly last week. But they talked at Malia McRae's company Crux in her speaker series, and a great question was asked at the end. How can people help, right? To make Kansas City or whatever community they're in better. And it was more about, what Sly said, just get involved, do something, So, I'd turn that question to you, Father Justin, like, what can people do to help you or help reconciliation services?
So the first thing I think is you got to get aware of what moves you. One of my favorite sayings is that what moves you motivates you. And so we don't take enough time to stop and really consider what are the social issues, what issues in the community really move me and keep me up at night. The second thing you need to do is go out and read about that and become educated. Don't go act first, but listen. Really do that community listening. Understand what the depth of the issue is and where solutions are being presented and how you can plug in. And then finally, that's when you can act and you can get involved. Once you've done that heart work and you've become educated. Now, again, that doesn't have to be you don't have to have a PhD to do that. You might take a half hour for each thing, but to move with intention, there's another great leadership quote that says, that it's not just good intentions that lead us to our destination, but setting our direction, right? Direction, not intention, leads to destination. So what I want people to do who are listening is like, set that direction. What is it that you want to do in your life as a leader? And what impact do you want to have beyond your 9 to 5? And how do you incorporate those together in your daily life and work? One great way to begin is simply to come and have lunch at Thelma's Kitchen. Bring a client down. Tell them what your priorities are in terms of community, not just by sharing about it, but where you have lunch. It's a great place for a business meeting or a cup of coffee. You can go to thelmaskitchen.org and you can cater a meeting. That's another incredible way to make an impact directly. You're going to have lunch anyway. Why not do it in a way that's going to help people survive and succeed in our city and advance this work? But then coming in deeper, getting involved, maybe reaching out about a board position or looking at how to become a volunteer at Reconciliation Services. That's really what I need people to do. Whether it's here or somewhere, we've each got to do that hard heart work, get educated, set our direction, and then get involved. And the more of us that can make that a priority, the better. And hopefully Thelma's Kitchen and Reconciliation Services would get to be a part of that journey for your listeners as well.
Yeah, no, that's phenomenal. How about in terms of your helping others, whether it's your leadership coaching or being a facilitator for social entrepreneurs? How can they get involved that way?
Absolutely. If anybody's interested I love to come to speak to groups. I love doing keynotes and small groups, and I love coaching and working with social entrepreneurs and others as well. And probably the best way is to reach out to me on LinkedIn and just DM me and start a conversation. I'm also a part of a consulting company called Plex with a number of great leaders here in Kansas City. And if I'm not the one to help you, I promise you there's somebody in the Plex group that's going to be right for you. And I would love to connect you to somebody that can help you advance your goals. So, DM me on LinkedIn, reach out, check out our work at Reconciliation Services in Thelma's Kitchen, and I'd love to get to know your audience.
Yeah, that's great. I love that. Two groups I always want to help is that the first group is that recent college graduate. They have their degree or are about to get their degree, and they're going to take their first step and get their first, post-college professional job. What advice would you have for them as to get that first job as well as begin their career journey?
This is a framework that I teach in the social leadership course at thesocialleader.org. And I would recommend that people take it. If they can't afford it, reach out to me and I'll try to figure out how to make that happen for them. I really believe the younger a leader can do that hard heart work, discover what moves them, that they will find that motivation that will send their career in a direction that gives them purpose and meaning. And I'll tell you what, I think most leaders today, particularly recent graduates, they don't just want a good job, a gold watch, and insurance. They need those things for sure. There's families to take care of, but people want purpose. And we don't teach enough how to integrate purpose into the fabric of our daily life and work. And I think the more a young person today can think about that, the better. You don't have to work for a nonprofit to make a difference, but you do need to think about purpose and how you can pay it forward for others.
The second group is if you decide once you start your professional career, you want to take the path of having a group of people that you're responsible for, so becoming a manager or director or VP and above. What advice would you have for them as they take that first step and become a manager and now are responsible for people?
Two things. Number one, read unexpected things. Don't just read the business books, right? There are great business books out there, but read about history, read about theology, read about anything you can get your hands on. Read poetry, because most of the inspiration that I've had for how to improve as a leader didn't come from the best-selling business book. It came from an incredible poem or conversation with somebody. That's the first thing is read and read unexpected things. And I think the second thing is we need to understand as leaders how that rumbling emotional world that we all carry quietly in our hearts impacts those that we work with and lead on a daily basis. And becoming what I call a trauma-informed leader, somebody who is equipped, prepared, and comfortable to walk alongside an employee and go that extra mile, listen a little longer than might even be comfortable. That's also something I teach in that e-course, in the Social Leader e-course. But I think that those leaders who equip themselves to have that kind of trauma-informed and empathetic approach are so desperately needed. And it's not about being kind of flimsy and touchy-feely. I mean, to me, this is cutting-edge leadership. This is how we figure out how to work with and pull aside of our teams to make the environment the best for them to be able to perform and to succeed. We've all been through a lot, especially in this last 5 years.
Sure.
And I think that new kind of leadership is one that we need to embrace strongly, and it's never too late to begin.
Great advice, Father Justin. Thank you for coming on the Corporate Couch. You're a gift to Kansas City and anyone that has the pleasure of working with you, no matter where they live. So thank you so much for coming on today.
No, Jeff, thanks. This was an honor. I hope that there was something, a nugget in there somewhere that would inspire somebody. But thank you for all the incredible leaders that you interview and for the privilege of getting to come on your show. It's just wonderful. I appreciate it.
Wow is all I have to say about talking to Justin, Father Justin.
Man.
As I started the interview, I said it. I mean, there's, interviewing over 100 people for our podcast, Joe. Most careers are, the squiggly lines. They're all over the place, starting in college, switching majors and all that. But his is a journey from, a wealthy high, wealth, socioeconomic city in suburb of Kansas City to going to SMU in Dallas and then being ordained, going to seminary. I mean, just it's a crazy journey, and he's just so good and eloquent, and there's so many lessons in his in our conversation that he, but I just and I know you're probably. I know you like this type of thing, but I mean, the whole idea of being a social entrepreneur and how he didn't fit into, he said, I didn't fit in the business world or the not-for-profit world or even the church world after, he was ordained as a priest, but he believed in being a social entrepreneur, and that was his gift to the world. But yeah, it was just so many good things. And he believes social entrepreneurship is the future of philanthropy, and he started with, when he took control of being the CEO, executive director of Reconciliation Services, he started an internet cafe first, and then the, RS Cafe, and that became Thelma's Kitchen. And, then he starts Social Venture Studios. He co-founded that, which he never mentioned his co-founder, but I think it's Kevin McGinnis of Keystone Innovation District, who we also interviewed. And, it's basically helping entrepreneurs, startup companies that are focusing on, having an impact socially as part of their business. So just so many good things that he's done. It's just incredible. What did you get out of the episode?
Man, this was an amazing episode, and Father Justin is an amazing person. I was totally blown away by the entire episode. I had never heard of the term social entrepreneur until this episode, and it took me a while to grasp exactly what it's being an entrepreneur, but being an entrepreneur for social purposes, right? So you're starting a company, maybe a non-for-profit or maybe for-profit or something like that, but the goal of the company is to have a social impact on society. And he has done that over and over and over and over again. I'm just blown away by the whole concept of Thelma's Kitchen, because it is so unlike what you normally think of as soup kitchens that came up during the Depression or homeless shelters or something like that, where you essentially invite a homeless person in and give them a bucket of soup and then kick them back out on the street again. And this is a place where you and I could go for lunch, or you and I could have a lunch catered or something like that. Everybody would be welcome in there. And then all they do is they say, when it comes down time to pay, if you can't pay, fine, God bless you. And if you can pay, then pay. And if you can pay it forward for the next person, they'll accept that. What a concept. And if they're successful at that, I think that's amazing. Now, this is a little bit of the libertarian in me coming out, but I always believe that in social services like this, the three most important words are local, local, and local. And it appears that this is the poster child for that kind of social service, that it's local people helping local people with local money. That's essentially what they're doing. And it is such a unique concept and such a wonderful concept, and it's apparently wildly successful. I had mentioned this earlier, but I'm going to say it again. Please go to their website and check it out. And if you're in the Kansas City area, check out the corner of 31st and Truce and see what this is all about. I thought it was an amazing interview, and I'm just tickled to death to get to be a part of it.
Yeah, and yeah, I totally agree. And the other thing, it was mentioned in the episode, I think, but I mean, like, he took over Reconciliation Services after being kind of the volunteer assistant priest there. But when he became CEO, executive director, he took that business from $650,000 in revenue and 4 employees to over $4.5 million. And today, 30 full-time employees and hundreds of volunteers. I mean, it's a great business story too, and
it's incredible success.
And we didn't even talk about, like, he was in a wealthy suburb, him and his wife, and I think he has sons, his kids, and they moved from a wealthy suburb and said, I gotta go be at 31st and Troost, which was part of the Red Line, the economic and racial divide of Kansas City, Missouri, and he moved, in that area. And, it's basically, I don't know if the area is like this, but reconciliation is, I think 99% of their people they serve are under the poverty line, and it's 90% African American. So, like, he's moving from basically a lily white, essentially, neighborhood to that type.
It's kind of a reversed white flight,
right?
Because he was saying, I have to move back there in order to be there to be effective. And I'll have to admit I wouldn't do that. But God bless him if he can. I think that's wonderful.
Yeah. Joe, what leadership advice would you have based on Father Justin's great episode?
We are going to go to that great philosopher named Will Ferrell, who had this advice to tell everybody. He said, before you marry a person, you should first make them use a computer with a slow internet connection just to see who they really are.
Thank you so much for listening to this episode of The Corporate Couch. If you enjoy the podcast, I would love for you to take 2 minutes out of your day to rate us 5 stars and write a review. Please join me next week to learn from another great leader sharing their professional journey and insights.